ready? No. No? Okay, welcome. This is the Lake Bluff Park District Special Committee meeting of the Land Use Citizens Task Force. It is June 14th, 2022. A very nice, warm and humid day, if you like that sort of weather. We have a couple of things on our agenda, most of them related to the document attachments that we're pulling together. But before we do that, let us call the roll, please.
Chairperson Kraus.
Here.
Task Force Member Trust.
Here.
Task Force Member Dewar.
Here.
Member Douglas.
Here via Zoom.
Member Gottschall.
Here.
Member Russell.
Here.
Member Snowland.
Here.
We have a quorum and we have again perfect attendance. Rob, hello by remote. Next agenda item is statement of visitors. Every Park District meeting allows an opportunity for members of the public, either in person or via electronic communication, to address the particular body, in this case the Land Use Task Force, on anything that they have in mind. So anyone from the audience here wishes to address us, make a comment, ask a question. If you do, please go to the podium. There should be a microphone there.
That we can do that. Well, if you could go back to the aquatics, has been done there.
No questions, or you do have comments? Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Susan Ryder, 456 Sunrise Avenue. I just wanted to comment on this tone. I know it's a ton of work you guys have done to look into all this. I had only a little bit to look at, a little time to look at it. I don't know, Steve has been burning the midnight oil or something over there next out my back door, right? So the work and the level of professionalism you guys have brought to this has been really remarkable. And I just wanted to say thank you. You're all public servants doing this, you know, in your spare time. So, and thank you. I look forward to reading the document.
Tell us after you've read it that you enjoyed reading it. Thank you.
Until after you've read it.
Yeah. Thank you for your kind comments. Any other?
The rebuttal to my wife, I will, about 456 Sunrise Avenue. If I have questions about your pro forma cash financial impact on Lake Bluff Park District model, it's now the appropriate time to bring them up.
I would, we have an update to that, and I would prefer that, let's see if we answer your questions. And if we answer your questions, great. If not, we'll go to the next step.
I will make sure that we pause at the end of that section of our agenda for your specific question.
Absolutely. Okay.
You get passes it to like happens here.
Yes, okay.
Any other in-person questions or comments?
I'm Dave Anderson, and my question is whether this group has an ability to make a recommendation that for the November ballot. If that's something that's covered under the scope, like a golf versus a wetlands option.
We do not. That is the purview of the Park District Board.
Okay.
We will, with our report, will have a number of alternative land uses for those of you that have looked at it already, but it's all set up to inform the Park District Board, the members of the board, as to potential options available based on the similar storage request. But we're not addressing referendum or non-referendum at all.
Okay.
Okay, great. Yes.
I am Gail Gamrack on 660 Green Bay Road, right over here on the other side of the sledding hill. I just, I wanted to say, I've never come to one of these meetings in person. I wanted to thank you for all your work.
It's been immense, and my fear in talking to park board members is that all of this work is going to fall on the 7 people that are on the park board, and they are the sole. When I read the On the Bluff publication that came out yesterday, again, it stated that the 7 commissioners will be the ones deciding on this immense decision. I would say one of the largest decisions that hit Lake Bluff in the last 50 years. And so I fear that all of your great work is going to just be a book report to 7 people that will then decide for the town. And I don't know if you have any say in having this come to a public vote or not. I don't hide that I'm from the Lake Bluff Preserve Group, and that is our main goal, is that the town gets educated on a non-slanting, factual basis. And then the town, because this is the largest decision that we've had, it'll affect our taxes, it'll affect the beach, the pool, everything going forward, that then the people get to decide and not just 7 people. Because then I feel like all your great work is going into the wind and nowhere. So thank you. That's my concern.
Thank you. You did mention a couple of key points. Again, we're not dealing with a referendum issue. We're dealing with making a series of recommendations. But what you said is the creation of a fact base, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last 6 months, is to create a set of standards, facts, that everyone involved with this issue can use as the beginning point for what we hope is going to be a healthy community dialogue. So that's the hope. Where this goes is really up to the community. The ultimate decision in terms of land use is it's the responsibility of the fiduciaries of that land, which is the board of the park district. So ultimately, that is their decision recommendation to make, and then the community hopefully has lots of input and may have reactions. But that's our task, is not to make a decision, but to provide the consistent fact base that everybody can use. And hopefully this document becomes on everybody's bookshelf. The Bible that people can pull and say, what did they say about that issue? That's what we're looking for. Okay. Thank you. Any other comments?
There are 2 on Zoom.
Okay.
First comment is from Gary Doyle.
Hey, everybody. I'll echo what Susan said, and Gail as well. Thank you for your service. And in my observation, you've been good impartial arbiters of this process, and I appreciate that. I frankly am concerned that the park board is not an impartial arbiter of this. But I guess I just wanted to echo what Gail said about, I fear that this will be, I mean, it's great that you're publishing this document, and it is fact-based, as you said, hopefully it is. But I fear it's going to be for naught, because it's going to be in the hands of a park board where maybe 4 people on that board have maybe already made up their mind. So I guess it's not possible. I wish that part of your recommendation, whatever it is, whatever your findings are, I guess I said you can't make a recommendation, but whatever your findings are, is that this should be a vote for the people to decide. It seems very obvious to me that the people should decide this, not, as Gail said, the 7 people of the board. So I guess I'm just echoing what Gail said. I wish that, I wish you had the ability to make that recommendation, because it's not recommending for doing a preserve or doing a golf course. It's just recommending for the people to decide.
Thank you, Gary. And we have one more.
Next comment is Mickey Collins.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. I just have one suggestion for the report, and it's your option. You have all the options for the golf course, And one is 10.5.2, and it's basically close the golf course and let it revert to a natural area. I think that that can actually be expanded and could be a more interesting option, because it seems to me that with relatively little moving of earth and, you know, major construction, that could actually be restored to a wetland. And then perhaps we could sell credits. I don't know if it would be exactly the same number as, you know, if there's all the construction work that's anticipated to create the 40 acre feet of stormwater storage. But, you know, that possibly the donor might be actually willing to contribute to just something a little more modest like that. So, you know, it would be no stormwater storage, but a wetland with credits. So that's just one suggestion. And then I also would like to reiterate a question I did ask before, and I don't know that an answer has come through, and I do think it's really important. Perhaps I missed it in looking at the report, and I have to confess, I haven't watched every single meeting of yours, but has the SMC said that they will guarantee since they're going to design and construct the stormwater storage system, will they guarantee its function and not place that obligation in perpetuity on the park district? Because that has some really high potential costs associated with it. I don't see it listed under potential maintenance costs. Those maintenance costs would cover, you know, maintaining the native species, eradicating invasives, things like that. But they wouldn't cover, you know, lower performance due to silting. Perhaps there's not the storage that was anticipated, some big event that washes away the banks of the stream and washes away a lot of vegetation and requires a lot of restoration. You know, I'm worried about those bigger aspects and what is the SMC's policy on that. And perhaps you already know it.
We don't already know it, but I do know that right before I came over here, I looked at an email from SMC that has responses to a number of outstanding questions. Sorry I didn't have a chance to look at it. I assume that's one of those questions, and we'll review it, and we'll certainly have it on the agenda and the packet, the answers, like we do with everything that everyone we communicate with. That memo will be in the packet for next time.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you.
And Steve, I could offer clarifications. Nikki's question was one of the ones that I insisted on forwarding. And Nikki, that SMC did respond to your question. So we will have it. We are getting an answer from SMC on that. But
okay.
We just received it literally before the meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Any other hands raised?
That's everybody.
Okay, thank you. Let's move to the minutes. We have received the minutes of our May 31st special committee meeting in our packet on Thursday this time. Do we have any corrections, additions, changes?
Yes, I have one.
Okay.
Page 4, middle paragraph that starts off with Chairperson Kraus. In the middle, there's a sentence that says he explained that there were 2 other options that SMC has identified. One is to use state funding, and the other is to utilize federal funding, but have SMC sell the credits. Shouldn't the end of that be is to have SMC utilize federal funding and have park districts sell the credits?
Sure, there actually is.
The middle paragraph on page 4 that starts off with Chairperson Kraus.
Said that there is potential concern. Is that the paragraph? The couple of them that start off Chairperson Kraus.
Oh. Yeah, Chairperson Kraus said there was a potential concern And then in the middle of it, there's a sentence that says, he explained that there are two other options.
Well, that isn't one of them.
Probably just drop the last phrase off.
Yeah. When is your
Utilize
statement
federal funding,
of
period.
Confederate? Yeah, I don't know where that came from. So drop off the words, but have SMC sell the credits. Thank you. Others? Hearing none, entertain a motion to approve as amended.
So moved.
Second? Second. Have a motion and a second. Any additional discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, let's go to reports and discussions. The first is an update on SMC. I sort of gave that away, didn't I? We have just received a memo from SMC that answered a variety of questions that George had and some that Julie had. We haven't distributed it to this group, which we will do tomorrow. So we have some more answers, and that's what all I can say about that memo. Jan, do you have anything? I'm sure you've read it.
Yeah, there's not much, so you have time to take a look at it. It's actually an email, not a memo, but,
Is this
Yeah.
the one we received at 3:45 this
Yes.
afternoon?
yes, that's one.
So we do have it in our email. We
You,
just-
you all have it in your email.
Yes.
It was just received today from SMC. Then I sent it out to all of you, so you have a copy.
Okay, so we will incorporate whatever answers we have into the next draft of the document, and then we'll certainly discuss that at our next meeting. The other item on SMC is related to the potential challenges that SMC might face in using federal funding for this project. We talked about that last time. That there is a sticky area in their regulations about using you draw the line between using federal funds to do stormwater storage, and then where another entity, Park District, would turn around and take that developed property and use it as a wetland mitigation bank. So a request has been made at the Chicago District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for clarification. And we don't, to my knowledge, have a response to that yet.
They were looking at the end of last week, that they were speaking with their corporate counsel and expected that to take a number of days, to review and get back to us.
Okay. And as far as I know, those are the only two open items with SMC. So anyone else have anything else we want to talk to them about?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Okay. Our ever-changing and getting better and more detailed and more specific financial model and assumptions. Mark, I'm going to let you take us through where we are with this, and then we'll open up for questions.
All right. Based on yet another review of the document, some additional changes were made as of today. For those of you who are with us live tonight, we have been able to provide copies. The updated document will roll into the Park District package tomorrow that will go to the task force along with the documents that Steve was just talking about. But what I'd like to do is to provide you with the changes, the updates that were made to the document since we last convened. Number one, for a couple of good reasons, one of which is simply being able to read it more easily. The document was split, and it was also split by topic, if you will. There are three groupings of alternatives that the task force has talked about. One of them contained options related to the current course and specific utilization of the current course. The second are options related to wetlands, And the third is the option related to an 18-hole golf course. I'm sorry, 9-hole golf course. The second, at our last meeting, the recommendation was made to round all of these to the nearest $1,000 rather than having this down to such granular numbers as individual digits. And my son congratulated me on finding out how to do that rounding in Excel. I really feel good about that. That I figured something out that the Excel Meister didn't have. The third is if on the pages here, we changed the format a little bit. First of all, we did include the donor's anonymous contribution as income in previous versions. It's now added to the net. So you'll see a net figure and then a net figure with the donor contribution. And then finally, we kind of cleaned up the box at the bottom of each page that's entitled Possible Credit Payment Timing. And this is, and you'll see that the individual, our estimation of when the credits would come available by year, we chose not to, we changed away from providing a specific year. And the particular item that each of these steps put into. So the first payment would be released when the mitigation bank was approved. And as you see there, 20% of the credits would be released at that point. And then as subsequent standards are met, then additional releases are made in 25, 25, and 30% pieces. As we look at the alternatives that utilize wetlands, primarily for the purpose of simplicity, we removed the $135,000 per credit figure. And now we're just bracketing at 120 and 150. The 120 number, as we've talked about before, was a number provided to us by one of our consultants that reflects recent sales in Lake County, $120,000 per credit. $150,000 per credit appears to be perhaps reachable, but perhaps not. But it's probably at the upper limit of what we might expect the credits to be. So we have a conservative figure and I guess what I call a hopeful figure. The next area of I draw your attention to, and making this, this will cover maybe some of what you were asking about. We did clarify two elements of long-term maintenance. If you see on the document that talks about wetland long-term maintenance, the Corps of Engineers requires us to put funds in escrow for maintenance, long-term maintenance in perpetuity. And at least for right now, we're assuming that that maintenance, long-term maintenance, would be about $15,000 a year. We're looking for more clarity in that number, to be honest with you. The other item is long-term maintenance other. And if you look on the last page of the package, you'll find, last two pages, you'll find that the background for each of these items that we're talking about, in terms of a description, the financial data used for the comparison, and the source of the data. After discussion with Park District Management, we determined that depending on the option, that we would likely be, and forgive me, I see a typo. So if you're about to say something about my typo, I apologize. Well, we might be, all right. But that ranges anywhere from a half of a fully burdened head count to 1 head count per year for maintenance. This maintenance would be related to maintenance other than those activities that would be related to wetland and wetland maintenance, whether it's a short-term maintenance or long-term maintenance. So if we were looking at a wetland situation with passive recreation like trails or maybe a nature center or something like that, we decided that a half of a fully burdened head count would be sufficient to take care of that. If we were to look at an alternative with active recreation, it would likely require a full-time head count to take care of mowing the grass. For example, someone has mentioned that it might be desirable to have a soccer field. If we had a soccer field, then it would have to be mowed on a periodic basis. It would have to be lined on a periodic basis, and those kinds of things. So obviously a much higher profile in terms of maintenance. The next thing, and I believe the last thing I would draw your attention to, is that we clarified the figures for alternative 7 and made sure that that did not include a contribution. That's a golf. That is a golf related alternative that did not include the donor contribution, because our anonymous donor has a requirement that the funds are not used in relationship with a golf amenity as part of this program. So additional information is available in the terms and assumptions section that talk in detail and would provide background for each of these items that we talked about tonight. So, Mr. Krause.
Yeah, let's just wait for 1 second. I just want to see if anybody else has any questions on the.
Mark, and I wouldn't have questioned it otherwise. Wetland, the road wetland long-term maintenance. You mentioned, I thought you said $15,000 per year.
Yeah.
And
that would be a 5% draw against the escrow.
And but it's supposed to be a 10-year model.
It is.
So 10 times 15 is 150.
Yeah, but
the amount you have to put into escrow in order to derive the 15,000
it's $300,000.
You're trying to get.
So and that's why it's tagged an escrow as opposed to doing 10 times $15,000 or 150. Because the Corps of Engineers requires that we set up that amount of money. What I think the tough part for us is to peel away and try to gather more information beyond a working assumption on what long-term maintenance is going to be for our particular situation. Right now we're using the $15,000 a year. I would submit that if we determined that it was 20 or even 30, it's probably not going to materially influence the evaluation of this. But nevertheless, I'd really like to find a better number, George.
Right. Yeah. Well, there is no magic answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm still the timing schedule at the bottom.
Yeah.
The use of the term year 1. I mean, I haven't seen anything anywhere from any of the experts that said that we could get to MBI approval in 365 days from when someone says go. And I don't understand, the guy that we're recognizing as the biggest expert had told us it's probably 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of answers in our report, discussion in the report, and the question and answer to do with timing. And I'm hoping that once we agree upon the numbers in the table that Mark put together, that anytime there's an answer to do with timing or revenue expenses, that we use the same numbers, and that there not be, because right now there is a mix, and because, you know, the documents are flowing along, but I know Steve, I had a question, sent a question to you before about thinking the timing was just very aggressive.
I doubled many of the estimates in the draft. You'll see it when I get it tomorrow. My view of this, George, is that year one is when the clock begins, so that when the bank is approved, that's number one. It doesn't count the pre-approval, the permitting, or anything else. That's a 1 to 2 to 3 year process in front. So when the MBI is approved, that's when the clock starts for purposes of allocation.
Well, then we should put
Credit revenue. Maybe
We
there's a better
should-
way to say that.
We need
Is that
to
what you-
explain that.
We can do that. I'm more than happy. That one could almost say that's the clock starts at year 0.
Okay.
And so we could put that at, I think what we heard from V3 and Land and Water was 1 to 2 years from point 0 to approval of the bank would be anywhere from, I think the figure we even got was 12 to 18 months at one point. So I don't have a problem, George, changing that around.
Just a footnote clarifying how we're counting, that's all.
And I agree.
And then
we should.
all the other answers we have, there's text in the report, there's question and answers, and right now, there's a variety of estimates. They're all in the same ballpark, but I think it'll help the residents when they get the report, if we could somehow blend it all together. And I would think there needs to be agreement on the tape first and have everything else cross-checked against the numbers in the table. And then there's also the percentage release schedule. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if we went with the SMC method as mitigation bank, the percentage schedule is different.
Yeah, slightly.
And
It's 25% in year one and then slightly
Right,
less.
so I'm thinking the footnote should also say, Mark, that this is based on the core regulatory method.
Got it.
Okay?
Can do.
And in the draft you'll get tomorrow, prospectus development and planning, it's not tagged as 1 to 2 years instead of 1 year, just to recognize the challenges that we face. George, you got a few more?
No, that was it on March stuff.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I do have a question. Mark, remind me if you would, how we arrived at the amenities number, the 300 and the 600,000 for alternatives 5 and 6.
It's purely a working assumption. And we really don't know. We're sort of in a bit of a circle here, and we talked about that with the Park District. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what the community wants. We don't know what the Park District might desire. So a good starting point in my research would be a bare bones soccer field would be about $200,000, for example. And so adding some additional funding for that, beyond that, because we've talked about skate parks, we've talked about
Decks, the pictures of the decks on the ponds, SMC.
Yeah, and that's something that actually would be passive and not active. And so we're in search of trying to figure out, for example, what the cost per foot would be. Actually, we got a number now this week, I believe, of what the cost might be for different paths, whether it's gravel or boardwalk or something like that. So a lot of this, we don't know how many feet of that. We don't know what the proposal is. So we're, in many cases, some of these working assumptions are placeholders.
Right, okay, and I'm wondering though, if we need the same kind of placeholder for alternative 2, discontinued use of the golf course?
Mm-hmm.
Because as I hear Mickey and listen to some other people, I think just having the golf course be gone with no other recreational facility may not be the vision? I mean, do we think we need something, if you're gonna put paths in there or something to make it usable space, that would presumably be?
Well, I think that was the scope of number 2. If we want to now come up with another, like a 2A, we can do that. I think what Nikki had said really is very much like somewhere between alternative 3 and alternative 4, where there is some element of design storage on the golf course. We also heard someone point out, make the comment about, well, just a little bit of wetland. Well, honestly, we have the opportunity for SMC to spend a significant amount of money on a lot of wetland and provide a higher rate of return to the park district. So I'm more than happy to keep adding alternatives, but I keep slicing the pie ever more thinly.
Maybe just something that makes it clear that if alternative number 2 is the alternative, that presupposes that there's nothing.
There's nothing.
There's
That's
nothing.
exactly.
There's no path, there's no dog park, there's no nothing. And if anything's wanted, it would have to be an add-on to that.
Yes, and that is, it's absolutely, we walk away from it. This is not quite what Highland Park did, because Highland Park invested about $1.5 million or $1.7 million to get there, but they all abandoned their golf course, did a little bit of planting and dug a hole and said, we're done. And so if that's what we're talking about, then we can conceivably go there. And I'm a servant to this process, so I'm more than happy to add additional ideas. At some point in time, it's going to end up coming down to the park board to sit down and take out whatever we offer and slice it and dice it and maybe take a little bit from A and a little bit from B and a little bit from C to come up with D. You know, that's.
So the report will specify, not that everybody's going to read, except Susan. Susan is going to be the only one that's going to read the whole report. But the report will specify for this option that it's just bare bones, that if there's any amenities, there would be an addition. Just like where we have a golf course, a new golf course, we don't know what that costs, so it's kind of the same idea.
Right, okay.
Good point. Other comments? I have an observation. I was looking, since I was doing all the editing on the draft the last 2 days, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But I was footing the draft against these numbers to make sure they were the same, which is a good editor would do that. And one of the things that's dawned on me in the 6 weeks that we've been working with this financial model, every time we meet, the margin gets smaller, meaning the costs are getting higher. So last time we met, we had talked about increases in project management fees and some of the upfront fees that increased the cost. And this time we had a really significant change for 2 weeks ago in the long-term management costs for the non-wetland maintenance. So if you're looking, and this is just an observation that is striking to me, that we're at a point now, with or without the donor contribution, where expenses are getting to be half of the expected income. So I think that's just important for us to get our arms around this, is that the income, we spent most of our first couple of months worried about what the price of a credit is and how many wetland credits are carved out of the golf course, and we got a good handle on that. And we spent the last 6 weeks figuring out the expense load, and I think we're getting to a point that I'm really comfortable with these numbers, given all the assumptions that we built into them. So I think it's important for us and for the community, as they start looking at this, to understand that we're looking at pretty high expenses in order to pull this off. And on the other hand, there's still a bunch of money potentially, if the wetland scheme works, that could be available for other uses. So I think it's, again, a good fact base once we finalize it for everybody to get their arms around.
And and I think we've had a couple of people talk to us about this, whether they be consultants or whether they be, for example, the Libertyville Township Supervisor who came in and talked about her initial net was exceedingly small in terms of what Libertyville Township appreciated from this. This kind of percentage, after you talk to other folks, DuPage County, for example, it would not be surprising. It is not an inexpensive process to go through this. And, you know, we all started as a blank slate, I think, attracted by what somebody pointed out was the golden ticket of $11 million, and it was really exciting. And then we kind of got in, as we began to burrow into this, we really found out that the underpinnings of what's necessary to accomplish this mission. And it's significant.
Yeah. Again, we've been talking about this since January, that the equation is credit, the price per credit, what the marketplace bears on the price per credit, times the number of credits that can be generated from the golf course property equals gross income minus a whole raft of expenses to make this thing happen. So all of those things we think are pretty well documented in the report, but that simple equation gets us to an expectation of potential capital money that can be used for other purposes. That was one of the primary reasons this task force was created, to understand if that was real, and we think the numbers here show that. Okay, Todd. Oh.
Reasonable part of our families, I should say. I have a couple of questions. Here's the smart part, I'm the reasonable part, I guess. So the 300 and 600, I understand the necessity to have those amenities estimated, and that makes some amount of sense, as does the escrow amount at 300, although I thought I heard somebody say that would throw off 15,000, and so 300 would sit in escrow. I don't know, but these numbers are good faith numbers. But what I'm concerned about is this fine print, because I think I've heard people in the community really grasp a hold of what can't we have both, right? And 7 and 8 are both, right? Some form of both.
Some form of both.
Right. And what?
Well, and you know, Susan, I think in fairness, you have to look at alternatives 3 and 4 as well. The first pass mission here is to provide stormwater storage. And so it really becomes a question of, that's mission number 1, is for us to be able to provide some amount of stormwater storage. Can that be done and maintain the existing golf course?
Yes.
And that's kind of sort of maybe, but we've got to figure that out kind of thing. The second piece of that, we begin to move into wetlands, and that turns, not even metaphorically, it turns the page into a whole different model that says, it's another way of storing that provides us an income stream.
Right.
And then, of course,
and passive recreation that would benefit.
Exactly. And a range of things that we can do if we were to go to some sort of a wetland program.
So I know that we've estimated those 300 and 600 with necessity, but we haven't even made an attempt to make estimates on 7 or 8 of the cost of installing a 3-par golf amenity or the cost of installing a 9-hole golf course. And I think those, at least in my very rudimentary understanding, would be very expensive endeavors. So to have those numbers, 7 and 8, look like they're comparable to 5 and 6.
Yeah.
it just visually is misleading.
Well, and at this particular point in time, really the best that we can do is to footnote it, not include it, undetermined golf course design and construction costs.
Or give a range, because I think you end up with a very deceptive for people who really want to find a compromise, and there's many people who want to find a compromise. Look here, this is pretty good.
We have, if we chose to pursue that, we have a subject matter expert, a very gifted golf course architect.
Yes.
Who has offered to provide us with a top level assessment.
So why not do that?
Well,
my question.
that's up to the park board to, okay the funds for that. That's a little
I see.
$13,000 to do that. It's not free. The gentleman at hand is highly skilled. He received a great deal of national notoriety for the Oak Meadows course down in DuPage County. And this is what he does, is wetlands and golf.
If we wanted basically a net zero-sum game, we could put in a different golf course. It's very, that talk about perspective.
My gut feel is that, from what I've been able to gather, that a par 3 course is going to be somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000. That's what, but I don't have, that's not even enough information as a working assessment. The total all-up cost for Oak Meadows was $17 million, all up. For Oak Meadows is in DuPage County, and that was significantly rebuilding an 18-hole golf course.
I think you're saying this could be done for 250 to 500?
A par 3 course.
Par 3 holes?
But then you lose $1 million. So it's all.
You're much more optimistic than I am about the cost of building a par 3. Par 3 holes or par 3 9 holes?
9.
Oh, okay. We'll do that for $500,000. Let's do it. So
let's get to the.
That sounds, I'll just voice that sounds extremely low.
It sounds extremely low.
That's a number that I got a whisper on. I agree with George. I think that's low. I think that's low. I think we'd be hard to do this for less than 7 figures.
So, Susan, we had to make a decision as to where to stop our analysis, and the analysis stopped with going out to get another independent golf course professional and an engineering firm that would give us the cost of building a golf course. So that's why there's no number there. Now, I will make a suggestion for the financial model, because I just put in the report that you guys will see tomorrow. When we get to the financial summary of the two that have golf, the one 9-hole integrated and the other the par 3 course, since we don't have numbers there, I didn't sum it. I had question marks as to what the net to the park district is.
And then put a range in, because I
don't even want it to do ranges.
Yeah. All right.
On the draw.
I think it's a real, honestly, it's a real gut check to even throw to throw working assumptions in.
Well, we did it on the 300 and 600 without even knowing.
But you know what? I think we've got an inkling of what that is. I don't have a clue as to what it would take to come in. Mr. Martin told me that he would try to preserve what he could in terms of greens and tee boxes and fairways and things like that. But we're talking about doing 3.5 holes that, in his sketch, 3.5 holes in the woodlands that would be all done from scratch.
Yeah.
From base zero.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's $500,000, but.
No, that's a big.
So I want to go back to something that I know Todd will raise, but before I even get to the level he's at to understand it, I need to understand where the long-term maintenance 10-year model of 1.5 million came from, because as you point out, Steve, the expenses keep going up and up and up, and we have
Okay.
upper limit on the 150, which may or may not be the actual upper limit, but
Let's talk about what those two line items are. The long-term maintenance for wetland is the long-term maintenance for we've got an upland prairie and we've got the wetland. So we've got the high ground and we've got the bottomland. And so the wetland area will require us to have to put funds available that would be used to maintain that ground. That's stipulated by the Army Corps of Engineers.
300.
Pardon?
300.
That's
right?
the $300,000. And George has suggested that may be low, and I think George may be correct, but that's the number we were given a while back, and for the purposes of this illustration, we're hanging in there with it. That would be, the Corps of Engineers requires us to put a certain amount of money in escrow. I used to figure a 5% draw on that money per year off the principal. So 5% out of 300 is 15. So $15,000 would flow out of that account and would be used to pay a third party to come in and do long-term maintenance on the wetland area. Okay.
So that 15,000 times 10 is 150,000.
But remember that's why this is footnoted as an escrow. It's an escrow.
There's two numbers here.
At year 7, at the final credit release, we have to have $300,000 in the bank in a separate escrow account that will be used in perpetuity for long-term maintenance of wetlands.
Which we should be able to generate, unless the market is what it is now.
We should be able to do that fine, and we should, and if we're in the wetland credit business, we should be able to have to set aside 300 or 400.
I'm with you on that.
Whatever
That I
it is.
understand. It's the next number that I'm asking about, the 1.5 million.
Okay, those funds are for other maintenance. Right now we have a golf course that's complete, we have a contract with Golf Visions. Golf Visions does 100% of the maintenance. I'm looking at John.
Yes.
100% of the maintenance on 145 acres. That includes the upland area and the wetland. So Golf Visions going away.
Yep, I understand.
Okay, Golf Visions goes away. So the wetland area, we take care of with the planned short-term maintenance program for 5 years, and then a long-term maintenance plan in perpetuity. That takes care of the wetland area. Now we have the upland area. So the question is, what do we do to maintain any amenities that we have in the upland area, plus any what I'll call amenities that are even in the lowland area, including walking paths. So if you're thinking about Middle Fork. Middle Fork has park trails and things like that wind through it. So those trails would have to be established, and then they have to be maintained. Walk through Middle Fork, and there are culverts and things like that have to be maintained. The surface has to be maintained. Water flow, if there's any blockage in the culverts, has to be maintained, and those kinds of things.
So the passive recreation 5 gets that cost at 75,000
over 10 years.
Yeah, 75,000 a year, right?
That's half a head count.
We double that. That's what I'm trying to. We double that for the active recreation. If we add the active recreation, what we're saying is we have the 750, and then we have 750 more for our soccer field, for our dog park. And where do we come up with 750 or 75,000 a year for maintaining those?
Okay. One head count. The assumption.
I don't know what head count, like.
What we do, one fully burdened head count is $150,000.
Head count, number of people who use it, whose heads are counting?
That is a park district.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah. So 75 is a half a head count. Okay. Okay. So, am I on line here, John?
Yeah, I think that's,
I may,
and then.
Todd, I may have a typo to correct on the terms of.
I think what you and I discussed, we looked at our pay rates for our park maintenance employees, and we were at, I think we were looking at the mid-range, something like, 55,000, and then it was plus about 40% for benefits.
So we're at 75 for one.
So that's 75 for a full-time employee. For an FTE.
That actually sounds good.
That sounds right.
Well, that's without any material.
Well, true.
That's just,
Yeah.
there's no,
That's
nothing
true,
else.
George.
Take care of whatever.
It was labor and no material.
We just need to be careful about what we're willing to estimate and what we're not willing to estimate. And there's costs in here we're not willing to estimate because they're too broad, and there are costs here that we're slagging at. And we just need to make sure that we're doing a good job.
And I think part of this is regrettably, we're a citizens panel. And
That's where I started.
and we're a citizens panel, and we're, as a member of the community, I'm trying to give this the best estimate that I possibly can with the foundational materials that we have that are readily available.
So let's look at this again and think about it. I think about this as a fully loaded FTE. I mean, that's kind of terminology I'm familiar with as an HR guy. So a fully loaded FTE is 75,000, right? So that's the labor component of maintenance. If John and the folks that Mark talked with, if it does take one FTE under the scenarios 6 and 7, which isn't, I don't think that's about right. The question then is, what is the other long-term cost that would include replacement of the structure the replacement of the structure or the entity that's been created. I think that we need to think about whether that's another 75,000 or whether it's something else. We need to add something to the fully loaded FTE, but the question is what.
The golden ticket comment kind of rubbed me the wrong way, I have to say, because you got to say $6 million is still not a, red ticket, right? $6 million is huge.
It's a sizable inclusion to.
So let's maybe be careful about how we reference that, because it isn't, the expenses keep going up and up and up.
I understand that. My reference honestly is to a lot of folks, and I keep reading in a lot of places and hearing from a lot of people that we're going to get $11 million, right? And because much of that information was circulated in the community.
Yes, right.
And sadly, that was a gross number, and I don't know that any of us here really figured that I figured that we were going to have significant expenses, but by the time we go through here, and honestly, the motivation for putting this model together was as much to try to identify every row, every item of cost possible.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, our financial and management folks with the park district are going to take something like this, and they're going to just go crazy with it. They're going to go out and they're going to quote, and they're going to have to get more substantial figures at some point in time to do this.
We've made a decision to look at every expense we can think of, except for the cost of building the golf course, but I understand that concern. We had made the opposite decision with respect to looking for any kind of revenue that might come in. Now, maybe we think dog park tickets or soccer field rental isn't material enough.
Yeah, right now.
We haven't done that same
Yeah.
thing, and we're capping at 150 How much?
And our assumption right now is that there would be no additional income from the dog park or from the soccer.
So be careful making assumptions that are only in one direction. That's my point.
You have also, it's not reasonable. Sure would be $50,000 over 10 years.
If you can show us a number that says $50,000 from the rental of a, we're happy to look at, come up on them. So our vast viewing audience can. Yeah,
It's a Lakeland operates, very successful dog parks, and I'm sure you could charge, $100 a dog, and you get 500 dogs, $1,000. That's $50,000 to $100,000.
Yeah.
And
I go back to
and you build if you're not going to include revenue, don't include the cost, because that's biasing the model.
I go back to what I said before, is that we have to draw a line someplace with this analysis. We drew a line with no income from amenities. If we have data that we can validate, or certainly, if the park district wants to, these aren't the ending numbers here. These are designed, let me get this on the table. These alternatives are designed for the park district board to make some decisions. Which ones do you want to investigate and go into much more detail? Work with the community, flesh out the design. A lot of this is actual design, especially on the amenity side. But at some point, we have to draw a line. We drew the line where we drew it. We also didn't include future costs, because that fully loaded FTE doesn't end at 10 years. The fully loaded FTE goes on forever, but we didn't attempt to include that in the model either. Maybe we should footnote that, but at some point, you got to choose. And we love this discussion because it helps us add clarity to our knowledge.
This would in fact be the park district's biggest park, so the park district is a perpetual entity, and so of course they would support their biggest park in perpetuity. I don't know why that gets burdened on the expense side with no evaluation of the tremendous benefits that cost implies. There would be huge revenues from the dog park, soccer fields. You could rent it to Craig Moreland for thousands of dollars. The school would certainly pay to have access to recreational facilities. I mean,
Todd, we understand.
There's a whole range of that, and you're biasing the decision away from.
I would prefer that we not use the word bias. We're trying to be very clear cut in what we're doing. We did make a decision to not include revenue from amenities. That's a decision that we made. We can always go back and revisit it, but it's not a biased decision. It's simply lack of information and lack of time.
I don't go out there picking up the dog parks and generate revenue from that.
We don't know.
Yeah.
That's not part of our revenue. I don't know that they earn revenue from it. I don't know what their financial bottom line for operating a dog park is.
Yeah, I think part of the point is this is sort of a leap into the great unknown, and I think all of the different alternatives reflect that. We don't know what amenities are going to be suitable, what they're going to cost to put in, what they're going to throw off. I do hear the point that it ought to be made clear somewhere that amenities could throw off some revenue. I think that is a fair point to make, and I think it should be made. So,
especially if you cost.
Yeah.
So we already covered this issue, but I think you. Model. 5 looks like it's 75,000. Correct. And I think it is curious that those options that include a golf course, so options 7 and 8, don't have higher levels of maintenance, because I'm very certain that golf courses have the highest level of expense and maintenance as far as irrigation.
And that, if you notice, that's covered by, I'll put it in air quotes, golf fishing, say with the maintenance would be covered under some sort. We're assuming it would be covered under some sort of maintenance and operational contract.
And that's I think another thing we need to clarify, because I don't think golf divisions have 3, 2, and 9 hole.
No, we don't know. And if you, I'd be more than pleased to put third party in rather than golf fishing. But I think the point here is that the maintenance and operations would not be a burden to the park district. That is the substance of why those are noted as they are. Is that, and they're, in going back to what we talked about, if we took most of the maintenance here away for the other, we're using, effectively using for 9-hole golf course, we're effectively using all of the upland area and a significant portion of the wetland, the lowland area, the bottomland area, with some walking paths mixed in. And so that's the substance of what the 9 piece is. But the significant part of maintenance would be absorbed by a third party. That's the assumption.
Right. Now, I guess that's a very much of a broad assumption, right? That, because we just entered, we have one contract, so to this point, and we don't, to say, we know that, over the course of this period, that we're going to continue to be able to get long-term maintenance.
And in discussions with the park district right now, I think the preference would be the third party operated rather than going back to a situation where the park district operated the golf course. And that's what's reflected here.
Right. Well, yeah. So again, I guess in the spirit of footnoting, you could say, we're assuming that we can, contract with a third party to, do this, because from what I understand, it's a much different management opportunity for them, a 9-hole course and an 18-hole course, because most of their costs would probably stay the same, having to have people on the course and people mowing the course, but
I don't know. They got 50% of the acres.
Right, but you still have to have all the guys in the clubhouse. So
there's some fixed costs and some variable costs. You're correct.
Well, okay. And then, yeah, I guess, then the last thing to, I think you should think a little harder about is, the comparisons on 6 and 7 and 8, and how much. It doesn't seem right to me that those all have the same, short-term and long-term maintenance characteristics. They're very different maintenance. So, as far as I understand, the golf course would have the, most expensive maintenance characteristics of many of these other alternatives.
For the record, the short-term maintenance is short-term maintenance is prescribed by the Corps of Engineers. It's very prescriptive. I guess I just made a redundant statement there. They actually tell us exactly what has to be done year by year by year until we basically are, turn the project over. When the project is complete, when the Corps of Engineers, either themselves, I shouldn't say when it's complete, during the course of the first 5 years, either the Corps or an outside contractor comes through and actually does a very comprehensive annual inspection of the wetland to make sure the wetland health and everything else like that. And that's not an insignificant cost as part of the short-term maintenance piece. So that short-term piece is fairly prescribed and is a figure that we actually have a quote on from an outside consultant, and that's what we're seeing here. A quote. We have a quote, and understand. And let me qualify that in a bit. The particular model that we're looking at here is very unique. As we talk to our consultants, this is not the typical process that you go through. Normally, when you want to do something like this, you basically turn it over to an outside party, an outside entity, and they do the whole thing. We're in a very interesting situation here where the usual model has an outside entity who does all the construction, does all the construction management, does all the design, does all the earth moving, does absolutely everything. And here, we have the possibility of having SMC come in and do a sizable piece of that for us. That makes, as we've talked to everybody, that makes this a very unique situation. And it's made it very difficult for us because when we ask these folks, well, what would you charge to be the consultant only? Oh, you mean I don't get to get the money for moving dirt? No. Oh, well, that's different. What would you charge to do the design? You know, when you get into all of this, what we have here is it's a hybrid model that really doesn't have, in this area, that doesn't have, it's very different. There are some areas, DuPage County, where they're able to do a lot of this kind of this way, but we don't have that skill level up here. Yes, sir.
Dave Anderson again, and now that I've had a chance to look at it, this is just outstanding what you guys have done. I think that when I was looking at the minutes from last time, Member Douglas was saying it'd be really helpful to have some of the pros and cons of the different scenarios. And then, which is great, and Member Bottrell, which is frequently asked questions. And someone's got a lot of modeling and merger and acquisitions. Assumptions, just clarifying the assumptions, like some of the questions, they're just so valuable. As I'm looking at this, my takeaway is a 10-year model. So this is aggregate. My assumption is it's probably 2023 out to 10 years. Okay. I also imagine, Mark, that you have underneath this your 10 years. I don't know, the 10 years that aggregates it. Time value, as I think of.
Yeah.
Well,
We dipped our toe. We dipped our toe into time value, and we had quite and that begins.
I've been in your situation.
That's the way I would, in a corporate setting, that's the way I do.
Well, but at the same time, what I'm so curious is that this is really informing the park district, which is, okay, what are some of these other major expenditures I have coming different times, whether it's the beach or some other things. So not necessarily doing the time value,
okay,
but here's kind of the expected time of the revenue coming in. Just being clear on the assumption, because this being a citizens board, here's a document what this is providing to the park district to do their elected job is beyond incredible. And then the park district then can collectively say, okay, what do we do next? And then ideally, from my perspective, it would be, what do we do next, and bring it and engage with the community to get to what the optimal outcome is. Yeah. And I'm just saying that would be, is there a big expense coming that is going to be needed that could require a referendum if nothing's done? As an example, there's just a few rows of assumptions that then go to the park district to then get one.
So we've got that. We have annual estimates for all of these assumptions of income and expense. We can easily put that in a spreadsheet if you think it would.
I think it would be helpful for those that would go deeper.
Sure.
I just think that's helpful, and then like the assumptions of saying, here's what we did with this model. We're gonna make it, here's what we did, and it says it's 10 years and we haven't dealt with, any discount, but by the way, we added it up, which is very helpful. So that would be one thing. The other thing I couldn't quite figure out when I was looking at the golf course, there's so many, when you're in a coffee conversation here and there, and it's not very helpful when someone throws out an assumption that they got from someplace. I'm like, I would like to just go to a source that is agreed to and understood, which is this. When is I going to this? I'm looking at, well, what is the history of the cost of running the golf course? And I see that. Now, what didn't quite add up to me when I looked at the model and the assumptions is going forward, there's an expected amount of golf course going forward, I thought was about 25,000 a year. So here on page 25, we've got a description of the projected average annual net operating gain for 22 to 27 is 10,000. The projections include 25,000 in annual golf business revenue share. And then the implication is that the operations neither significantly add to nor detract from the annual park. So I'm trying to see, is there a revenue number of the 25,000 annually that's in the revenue of the assumptions that we have to golf course?
Yeah, I
couldn't make that.
Yeah, Jen, could you get a copy? It's in our meeting minutes. There's a financial analysis, 7-page financial analysis.
Does it then make its way summarized here? Because I didn't see a revenue.
It's in the report. It's because there is negligible annual impact except for capital expenses that need to be.
I saw 207,000 over 10 years, which.
So from an annual operating perspective, which is sort of what this is based on, we believe that the operations of the golf course are negligible.
Okay, so then if they're negligible, I would just put a little clarity in that paragraph. When I read the paragraph, I'm looking for 25,000 a year. And I'm looking to find that.
Well, there's a reference to an appendix item. It should be, if there is.
Well, page 25 does say that revenue is 25,000, but the net operating result is 10.6.
Okay, so
the net operating result is what Steve is saying is negligible, because that depends a lot on whether we get the 25 or not. And that depends a lot on, if the number of rounds played continues to stay at a very, very high level.
And that therefore, to me, just be a clarity on the 10,000, and that's, I know it's there in the implication, but I would just make that a little clear.
Okay, great.
Which is that, if anything in the phone on, it would say, hey, there should be some, some upside. But I would just reinforce what you guys are doing is yeoman's work, and I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And in terms of what you requested in the beginning, FAQs, we're actually going to talk about a draft of those tonight. It's not finished yet, but we're close. And we're still missing an executive summary and the ending. And the ending is where specifically going to be pluses and minuses of each alternative.
The pluses and minuses, and then, would capture something like, hey, there's revenue upside on, option 7 and 8, so just saying, we didn't capture that, but that would be the park district.
Well, and actually, I'm going to go back to all the alternatives that have amenities that could generate revenue, and that put that, based on today's discussion, put that comment in the draft of the report identifying.
And we'll put that back here on the growing list of terms and assumptions.
That's where we're like to get into the detail.
There's a lot of dirty detail in it.
It's really,
Great. Fine.
I'm sorry, I'm not this in here. I heard, and again, hearsay, the irrigation system on the golf course is 15 years old. Is there anywhere in the park district or in the capital expense about, and the lifespan I'm understanding is 20 years for an irrigation system, that we will need to replace that in 5 years?
It was in our master plan. Do you remember, Noah, how far out that was? When was it replaced or installed?
And at the expense of what, do you remember? Yeah. It was in the, it was less than $1 million, over
Yeah,
$1 million?
750. I thought I remember hearing 750,000.
I know that it's what caused some of the debt that we are paying off now is the irrigation system that was put in 2006. And so the lifespan of a golf course irrigation system is around 20 years, I'm understanding. So is that anywhere in the projection in the next 4 or 5 years that we'll need to replace the irrigation system on the golf course?
There were components that are in the 10-year, the $807,000 10-year list. Some components of the irrigation, certain pumps and controllers, but more of that cost is out beyond that. I know a lot of that list was developed. The timing was developed with an architectural firm that helped develop, the life of, the different amenities. So I think that, that's something that our finance committee, reviews and addresses each year. But currently there are some pieces in that, I think, that in the 10-year, some irrigation pieces, but not, the main, like replacing all of it at once. I think that's
Okay.
beyond.
So that's just something that I think is important for this report, that
Actually, if I might suggest, I think what we tried to do was to take the existing capital plan that's already been approved, the golf course that the park district is operating there, and we basically dropped that into this.
questions about that, because it was 2 million and then it went down to 800,000, and where did that go? And I just want to make sure, like a roof on a house, when it's 20 years up and you need to replace it.
I'm just explaining.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Mark.
I want to get back to you. That's where the numbers came from. And, we could probably go back, and we haven't gone back and asked somebody to completely re-put a capital plan. I think that's probably outside our purview. We felt that it was most appropriate to take whatever was approved, whatever the park district had planning to do over the next 8 years, 10 years, and drop that in here as that can pass the straight face test.
Right.
And that's probably the most important thing we can do.
Okay, so John, maybe I can follow up with you about what that would cost.
Yeah, you
And then,
I think what's important, if that capital list that we're using now was developed before there was this wetlands discussion of, are we possibly, trying to keep the golf course or possibly getting rid of the golf course. So it was developed with the idea that we were keeping it, and how would we, pay for those long-term repairs and investments. And we went through with staff, and again, we have binders of, when a consultant was brought in and they developed, how many years is the line? When a lot of that, again, that fact, that $2 million list, it was, a lot of that was involved with the clubhouse. And so when they did a $250,000 renovation, they replaced the roof and a lot of the doors and the interior walls and plumbing and electrical. So, a lot of that stuff was maintained. There's a number of different reasons why that went down, but that I'd be happy to go through that with and show that to you. And it does need to be reviewed. It's something that's reviewed every year and adjusted, but that's how it was developed.
Okay, well, I would think the review of that with all that's on the table here would be before the end of this report, if that's gonna be this major expense going forward. It just seems to make sense, right? But that's not after the fact, oh, by the way, we're gonna review our golf course capital expenses. But,
To the board.
yeah, okay.
So, yeah, I just want to make clear that capital expenses for the golf course utilize an existing schedule that the park district had put together and approved prior to the beginning of this discussion. So
Yeah, I understand.
that's why we're here.
But if it hasn't even been reviewed and we're using those numbers, that's concerning to me as a.
I'm just saying what we used as a task force to build that assumption. Second thing is because there was no sprinkler system. I have not heard the 20-year life of a sprinkler system. I have no idea what the life of a sprinkler system is. So if someone would tell me that over coffee, I would have to go, where'd that come from? Is that true? I have no idea whether that's true. And there's going to be a lot of things like that in this report. Because I know, I hear it, just like you do. There's lots of chatter going around. And I'm not even on Facebook, and I know there's chatter there as well. So we just need this. Where did this come from? What's the source that was used by the task force? What's in what we hope to be the repository of the facts, and then go from there.
Right.
Okay. So there'll be all kinds of discussions like this, and we look forward to them to get more answers. Thank you.
And yet, one other thing to be clear, when we received this 10-year capital projection on the golf course, I had recalled that there was, a much larger number that had been generated 3 or 4 years before, 2.2 or 2.7. That's what it was now. And the task force did ask staff to give us the explanation of why there was this big difference. And they did run through that explanation with us. So it's just take it
3 or 4 meetings ago, it should be in the minutes.
I don't remember the list, but they did give us an explanation of the difference between those two projections. A lot of it had to do with a recommendation for an elevator at the clubhouse. There was $750,000 to put a clubhouse elevator to go down to that little storage locker area in the original projection. It was. You could have put 2 lockers on the ground floor and covered the radiation requirement. So it was a silly, so there was, there were some explanations for some of the differences. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mary Anderson, and yes, I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing. This is amazing. I just want to speak to something, it's already been talked about, but reinforce this assumption piece, because I haven't been able to read them all because I can't listen and read at the same time like some people can here. But I see that option 8 is about the 9-hole golf course. And I've watched several of the meetings on Zoom, but not all. But I remember discussion early on saying that's going to really be hard to figure out what's the usage and what will be the attraction to the people wanting to play for a 9-hole golf course. And based on what you came up with that, I think that's going to really impact your golf vision's projections. So if it's based on the current contract, I don't think we can assume at all that they would be willing to extend the existing contract based on completely different level of play and attraction to the public. So again, I like the idea of third party. So that we're not telling
I think that's a very constructive idea, is to replace that, because it is presumptive that golf visions would do it. For our purposes here, we really meant third party, because and maybe golf visions is interested in doing this, for all we know. But we also it's also pointed out in terms of assumptions, is that course usage, course expenses. I mean, is our golf course architect tells me that he could create an incredibly unique, very desirable golf course that people would really want to play. And I think that that's probably pretty close to how he said it. But whether or not we can sell that to golfers in this area beats me. And we tried, and I tried to point that out. We don't have the ability to do a market study to determine all of that. And so everything you're saying is spot on.
So just reinforces this assumption piece, I think, and then back to the FAQs. So looking at what's the range of creating this new 9-hole golf course, not wanting to put those numbers in your spreadsheet, that's fine. I don't need to get into that, but there could be an FAQ that says the range is 300,000 to 8 million, because you said the 18-hole was 17 million or something, right? And I think people need to have those, that understanding of the range and the variability. One, to even know what questions to ask the park district, right? So the park district is going to get this information and they're going to do some things with it. But the public needs to know, what do we need to look for? What do we need to pay attention to and figure out what they're answering for us? So I just want to reinforce.
I appreciate that, and it's tough to do, and honestly that's why I kind of ducked it and said it's beyond our scope. If we wanted to commit a significant amount of money to it, and I suspect that the answer to the net financials is that, to say the least, it would be a significantly smaller number to all feature something significant beyond the price tag of a soccer field to go to some sort of a golf amenity. And I think that somebody pointed out, we lose $1 million in donor funding as well as part of that equation.
And you know what, this is running numbers and this is comparing, and there's going to be a lot of different opinions. That's why getting the assumptions clear, the FAQ, is going to really be helpful for productive community dialogue.
Yeah.
So thank you for all of this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Rich Martin. I just want to reiterate what everyone else said. Thanks so much. It's often a thankless job what you guys are doing, so thank you. You guys have done a fabulous job, I think, being really unbiased and doing your due diligence, which is great. That being said, I thought it was interesting what you were saying earlier about golf visions doing the management, and park district want to be the management of the golf course, which is sort of telling them if they don't want to be the management of the golf course, why do they want a golf course? So I guess that's sort of why we're here, because we have this opportunity to sort of get out from underneath that. But that being said, I think it's important that you guys push the park board to open up meetings that you guys are running, so people feel comfortable getting unbiased information directly from the source of what you guys have gone through the last 4 months. I think it's somewhat problematic that they've hired a PR firm, basically take your information, distill it the way they want, and then send it out to the public. So I think it's important that you guys are the ones disseminating that information, so there's no filter. So again, thank you for your time and diligence in taking on this huge task.
Any other, by the way, it's been 6 months, not 4 months, but who's done? Yeah.
You do have one hand up.
Okay.
Online.
Online?
Yeah, so
Very well.
Yes, hey everyone, it's Carrie Wells. Thanks for doing all you do. And so first of all, we're making some assumptions that the park board is going to be taking this information and skewing it. And I know, Rich, that was your point, which I don't think we should be making those assumptions. More importantly, I have a question about option 4. Can I just clarify something? So the numbers look like there is no SMC grant money available for option 4. And then, Mark, I thought I heard you say, well, maybe they would be willing to work with us. So can I clarify, is there any SMC grant money for storage that's unrelated to wetland mitigation banking for option 4?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's, as we look through the model here, conceptual design, survey engineering, any regulatory planning, site prep, performing any bonding, site development, all would be absorbed by SMC. If we were able to put storage on the current course, this is the initial task given to us, the initial ask was we need 40 acre-feet of storage to help absorb stormwater coming down the east branch of the North Fork of the Skokie. Right. And that was the initial ask. That then sort of moved into a second phase. Maybe that's the right or not the right word to use. The second phase, second consideration was, well, you know, you have it if you choose to do some wetland banking, and you might be able to secure some additional funding for that. And oh, by the way, we as SMC would pay for a significant portion of that as well. But if we wanted to simply do 40 acre-feet of storage without wetlands, SMC will pay for that.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, great conversation. Hopefully we'll continue with these kinds of questions at our next and maybe hopefully last meeting in 2 weeks. And also during the FAQ, during the roadshows. Yes.
I just want to say thank you to everybody. I've got all kinds of notes and scribbles on here, and I appreciate this. This looks a hell of a lot different than it did in its first iteration, and that's because of the community, and it's because of the task force and the input that's refined this. The numbers are different, the numbers are better, the assumptions are more clear. We've added additional features. Hopefully, as everybody keeps asking, how can we, as a task force, provide as much clarity as possible to the park district and the park board and park staff? That's the mission we got here. So I'm sorry, Steve.
That's all right. I was just moving on to 3C, which is the task force report, which will just be a quick update. So I apologize if there was any confusion with getting 2 drafts that had the same content. One was the original draft, and the second was the draft with Nikki's formatting and editing and her touch. The same essential text. I have in front of me, which I've spent the last 2 days doing, another draft. Surprise, surprise, it hasn't got small. That incorporates the comments, the very detailed comments from most of the members of the task force, and I thank you for that. I need one more review of this tomorrow. I'll send it to John early afternoon, and if you could send it off to the group. That will be, it'll be dated June 14th today, and that draft number 2, and that's the draft that I want to comment on now. So think of this in 3 sections. So the introduction and sections 1 through 8 are primarily background, right? We're talking about The park district itself, we're talking about SMC, the initial request for stormwater storage, what's the history there? The financials for the golf course and golf utilization. Some background information on wetlands, because I think there are folks who could use a little bit of a primer on what a wetland really is, what it looks like, what it does. Then something that we spend a lot of time on, and that's what in the world is wetland mitigation banking. It's hard to believe that 6 months ago I didn't know that critter existed. And now I'm afraid I know way too much and I'm never going to get it out of my brain. It's always going to be there. Following that are the regulatory rules. So the Army Corps of Engineers and the SMC regulatory schemes that Julie worked on with her team to give us a good comparison. And then what does it actually take to build a wetland bank? So what do you have to do? How do you move the earth? How do you do the planning? How do you do the planting? All of that stuff. So the introduction through 8 is primarily background material. And to the task force members, I'm assuming the draft you get tomorrow is pretty much finished. For introduction through 8. Now, you won't be shy about making changes if you want to. I know that. So go ahead. But I just want to lay it out there that I think introduction through 8, not the one you guys have in the audience, but the one I have in front of me that incorporates everybody's comments. And maybe we can put that online somehow. We'll have to talk about that. So everybody can look at it in real time. So I think up through 8, we pretty much have the words we want, but please send me your comments. The real focus on this draft is on 9 and 10. So 9 is introducing the land use alternatives, and then 10 is applying a financial model to those land use alternatives. And as you guys look through this tomorrow, you'll see those 2 sections have significantly changed. They follow the format that Mark has laid out in the financials. We first talk about keeping the golf course and options for stormwater storage on the golf course. So there's certain options there. Then we talk about a wetland and an upland prairie, certain options there. And then we talk about golf options. Options that include golf, either a 9-hole course or something else in the upland prairie. So it's slightly restructured and follows the description and then the financial implication in those 2 sections. So that's, as far as I'm concerned, complete from a draft perspective, but I would love your input on that. What we still need are the executive summary, which is always the last thing that gets done. And then, importantly, the last piece, which as a placeholder, we're calling summary and important considerations, which I think a plus and minus approach with some introductory material is a good place to start. So I'm hoping Mark will help me and Al and George and everybody in starting to think through how we put that together. I would like that section finished. I will commit to having that section finished by Friday, so you have the weekend to look at that as well. If we really want to be done in 2 weeks, we got to have most of this stuff done by Friday, so we can go out and have a full weekend to review, then a couple of days, put finishing touches on it, and then go out in time for our next meeting. So I'll commit to having that done by Friday. What's the Tuesday? It's going to be hot. I don't want to go outside. It'll be perfect.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So I need one more run through, then I'll send it through Nikki for polish. And then you send it to John with a note that it's okay to release. Okay? And that'll happen sometime. Okay? Sound like a good. And then we still have to do the executive summary, because I don't want to think about that until the rest of it. Okay, last major item on the agenda are the FAQs, and Julie, thank you for all the work you've done in putting this together. Those of you that are sharp readers have read the FAQs, and some of you wondered, what came first, the FAQs or the report? And the answer is pretty much the report. I mean, Julie wrote a lot of those sections, and I just adapted them for the report. But Julie, if you want to give us a little background of where you are and how you want to deal with edits and all that.
I will say what I've said from the beginning of this exercise, that my goal for this is to have something that is very approachable, very reader-friendly, and addresses all of the coffee shop conversation out there, the questions that the public has, so that we can level set, and the community can have a productive, fact-based discussion on all of the different considerations. So this is my first effort at that. I welcome all the feedback. I have some additional ideas for things I'd like to supplement based on the conversation tonight. I will be working closely with John and with Steve to make sure that there's accurate information that we put in here, but I certainly welcome any comments, edits, additional questions, and even better yet, additional questions and proposed answers to put in this, so that we can, address everybody's needs and make sure that, everyone can agree on the facts and the considerations, because I think there's, the facts are going to get us only so far. There's a lot of people in the community that have strong feelings one way or another, and a lot of people that might be somewhere in the middle and just sort of wondering about it all. And I think, one of the goals, I think, too, is to sort of put it all out there, think about all of the soft things. It's not just the numbers, it's also all of the neighborly kind of considerations. And I think, Dale spoke to it, and we all know it, but the momentousness of where we are now, that we are looking at committing to a land use that will, and make a decision that will commit this community forever and ever, in many different directions. And I think that moment needs to, I think all of that needs to be acknowledged, and the FAQs is the place to do it. So with that, I know one of the things that you acknowledged for, or designated for conversation is the tax implications of all of this. And what I have now is a somewhat incomplete answer. I know that we're working on getting some more estimates about what needs to be done with the beach and financing for that and things like that, to the extent, and correct me if we're not on the same page there, but that's what I'd like to see, because I think people need to understand what's out there and how all of this impacts it. So
yeah, so that question is question 27. Julie and I have talked a bit, and I've talked with a number of you separately a bit about how far the FAQs go. So there are two things here, I think, at least from my perspective. One is understanding the impact on property taxes. Now that becomes tricky, because is it property taxes related to the golf course? Is it property taxes related to one or all of these alternatives? Or is it the big unknown? The big thing we haven't talked about as a group is that it's in our remit that there are potential uses for the capital that could be generated through the mitigation banking, the beach and the pool. And to me, that's really where some of the tax implications come from. We have some information from staff on what projected repairs or replacement to those two facilities are, but we're looking for the right way to address this, both in the report and in the FAQ.
yeah, I think that's right. And in some cases, the answer may be we don't yet know, or this hasn't been decided, or here are the various possibilities. But I do think that's something that needs to be understood by the community, where that analysis is and where different options can take us. And so, I would ask for input on that.
And at the risk of stepping over the boundaries of the task force, I think personally, one of the questions in the FAQ should be, what are the projected costs for current estimated projected cost and timeline for fixing the pool and for fixing the beach? Because that's when people, meet me getting a sandwich at Luffington's, that's the first thing they ask, what's this going to cost? And I think that's a question that should be there. And I look to the staff and to the Park District Board to give us some guidance on what they would like to share with the community through the task force vehicle to help answer that question. And not tonight, but at some point pretty soon we'll need to know what ideas that, how we're going to address that question that everyone has. Other thoughts? Go ahead.
No, I guess I'm looking to both of you to make sure that we're all on the same page. Again, I don't wish to keep the task force going any longer necessarily, but at the same time, I do think as the community conversation evolves, that maybe the FAQs that are vetted through the task force might be a good tool for the conversation, and to make sure, again, that there's, a baseline for the dialogue. So, maybe if you have a reaction to that now or at some point, how you want us to handle that. Could be useful.
Sounds like we're beautiful.
Okay, you don't have to, we can talk about it, but with all of that said, comments, FAQs, any feedback, if you want to get me things, if you edits and email it.
Give them a deadline.
What's that?
Give them a deadline.
Give them a deadline, okay. So you can start now if you want to go.
Unless you're gonna go to the nitty-gritty, I will,
I'd say just
yeah,
give
I'll
it
just send those to yours, and
if you're
I have to go
conceptual.
through my red marks and see which ones are the bigger, like I thought, oh, that's not right. Type of thing.
Well, we don't want that. So,
Right.
yeah, if you just want to give me that when you're done, and I can, but I think what we can use this time for is to talk if there are big people's thoughts on it.
You didn't give them a deadline.
If you can get it to me truly by Friday afternoon, that'd be great, because this will be my weekend work at midnight tomorrow.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 3 hours. Okay. And Julie, I love your idea of that the report will be finished in whenever 2 weeks or a couple days after that. But I think the FAQs as a living document is really a good idea. I mean, I'd be happy to invest a bit of time, either a meeting or getting a Zoom call with the task force. And so here's 10 questions that don't seem to be answered, or we haven't addressed them correctly. And I think that's a great idea.
And then it like community conversation.
Yeah.
There may be questions that come here and it's like, oh yeah. And we should memorialize that.
Yeah.
Because as you said, this is forever.
Right.
Anything else on the FAQs? No?
I think Susan.
Yeah.
One thing I know that's missing from FAQs, and by the nature of what you've been tasked with, perhaps understandable, is we talk a lot about wetland mitigation credits, and we talk a lot about stormwater storage, but nowhere do we talk about wetlands, at least except in 26.4, as an environmental benefit. We've got, our beach is ravaged in part due to global warming, right? We have an opportunity to contribute a whole lot of wetlands to our immediate environment. There's really no discussion yet in the FAQs about what other non-financial interests we may have in not only building the wetlands that benefits the environment, and maybe a drop in the bucket when you consider the Amazon rainforest, but it is us doing our level best to do what we can to mitigate. We have a native garden club that's turning their gardens, their home gardens, into wetlands, into native plantings, in order to try to mitigate the effects of global warming and create wildlife pathways in order for wildlife to be able to migrate, right? There are lots and lots of benefits to wetlands that aren't discussed, aren't financial. And we haven't tried to really address that here. And maybe it's maybe it's really impossible to address all the reasons that we might want a wetlands, but if you had a blank slate and you could put in a golf course with chemicals and invasive species and trees that came from, other countries, or you could build a native wetlands, which would be the environmentally responsible thing to do?
Here's a complication I see with that. And, again, we can certainly address it in some way in the FAQs. But what I keep struggling with is if you sell the credits, though, you're netting out negative, right? Because then developers can destroy established wetlands at a cheaper price. So then it gets complicated, right? So
there's a trade-off. We would be creating extremely high-quality wetlands, and the wetlands that would be developed would likely not be along a watershed, like the Skokie is part of the watershed. The watershed, it used to be for wetlands, right? Before we destroyed it, it was wetlands. We have the opportunity to create incredibly high-quality wetlands with wildlife opportunities where don't know all of the people that we'll be selling the credits to, but if we're selling them to make hot shots, the ice rink needs more parking behind it. They've got a scraggly, unkempt land that happens to be in a wetland, and we have the opportunity to provide a wildlife preserve. It seems to me to be amiss to not at least give a nod.
So we've addressed it in the report. There's
right. It doesn't make it
section, so you're suggesting we need to reference. Okay. Maybe the way that
it's not a 1-to-1 ratio either. The lowest ratio is 1.5 to 1. So you're actually creating more net wetlands by selling wetlands. It goes from 1.5 all to 12 to 1.
Yeah, we understand.
Well, it's counter.
Thank you.
So, Susan, do you think it's appropriate in an FAQ setting to reference back to the report? To have a question about the effects of degradation of wetlands? Okay, so let's have a question on.
And I think Rich, very much, because that's circulating on Facebook, that we're trading 1-for-1. And my simple answer is high quality, beautiful wetland.
So that's probably another.
It's more important than that. It's quantity, it's quality.
Okay. Task force members, other things in the FAQs?
Yes, nothing that we need to talk about.
Right. Good. Yeah, everybody could take a look at that and get that to Julie. And the draft of the report to me. Anything else on that issue? Okay, task force reports. Any reports from members? We haven't. Oh, George, you had a quick update on V3.
V3 finally this afternoon did send us the corrected exhibits file that you were asking about, and that John Ryan originally pointed out that there was an error, and there were actually mistakes in both the cubic yard numbers and the acre feet numbers. And after 3 iterations of questioning them, they finally sent us a number that makes sense today. But the important thing is that the compensatory storage created does stay at 133 acre feet, which was the estimate, as the upper level of how much storage we would create if we went to the largest wetland that we could build. On the downside, the amount of cubic yards they're estimating that they're going to need to move to do this has gone up to 447,000 cubic yards. That's 48,000 10-yard dump trucks. So it's a massive, it is a massive project.
What's the number?
400, yeah, so that was one of my comments for your report, because you had 44, and it's 447,000 cubic yards is the first run through on their on their modeling, so.
So, John, will you send that? I might as well get a packet ready for tomorrow that will have the draft. You already sent the SMC letter, so just the V3 letter for everybody.
George, do we have do we have an alignment now between B3 and land and water in terms of whatever that amazing number was in terms of?
Land and water, V3, I'm sorry, John Ryan's firm never generated any detail. V3 was the one that was, paid the money through SMC to actually take a crack at the first actual model of how much earth you need to move to create the wetland area. So they're the only ones that have generated a number. Now, there is a jive between SMC's estimate of number of maximum wetland credits and V3. They came up with almost the same number.
Almost like that.
Yeah. So that was a reassuring check that we're in the ballpark there, that SMC and them came up, right around in that mid-70 range.
Anything else? Any other task force members? I have no additional report. Emily, anything from the board perspective? I guess a request is that we start thinking about, since we are going to be done in 2 weeks, that's around July 4th. So if the board wants to think about setting 158 survey days at least for community meetings, it'd be great to get as much advance notice as you can. And that will force me, I guess, into building the deck that we'll use for presentation purposes. I looked at that. So that would be great to do.
We were talking about yesterday's meeting, and we haven't decided the dates yet.
Yeah, I would guess just because we'll be done almost in June, and then the 4th of July comes in. So it's going to be hopefully, end of July, but we can get at least around the schedule. Don, anything? Any other items from the board? Any items from the audience, either live or online? Yes, but
I just had one other board again. I just had one other proposal for more detail in the FAQs, which is, I think the potential 50 acres of alternative recreational activities, gets, I think it's 26.3 or .2, but it could maybe get its own full FAQ about, some broad description of, the opportunities that might be available, because it's a potentially 50-acre piece of land, and there's a lot of potential that we could, at least illuminate.
That's great. What do you think of Velodrome? One of the things that we talked about didn't make a report, but
I don't like to hear all this laughter.
I think a velodrome would be kind of cool.
Well, George aspired us to conjure up very large ski hill.
Yeah.
Use all
I
that.
built the first one, I'm not touching the second.
Given what a great cycling town this is, and we have the criteria, I think there could be a real market for velodrome racing. It's extremely exciting. You could have kids programs, get them involved. I'm just saying, I do realize it's about 97th on everybody else's list,
but good comment. You want to come up with this?
So frequently asked questions, I kind of started that before I went through all this. About the opportunity for community engagement and between this group and the board to ultimately get the community really involved and then bring it to a community vote that comes November. So I think that'd be a question to ask, is a frequently asked question, so that it's not one side pitching something. But it's like, how do we engage the community and provide the support so that the community can make the decision? And I think it would be an incredible community building opportunity, which would be nice in that state.
I think that deadline is July 25th for the park district to put that on the ballot for November.
Does it have to be specific or can we speak if there is? I think
So this, again, sorry, but that's not our purview. Our report is to the park district, so maybe, I mean, if there is an FAQ that's added around a referendum, it's just that answer.
Yeah, it could be that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hear that question all the time. That one usually is run in a concert for some reason. So I don't know that. Anything else? Hearing nothing, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second? Motion and a second. Say it.
Nobody wants to say.
Any discussion? All in favor of adjournment? Say aye.
Aye.
Adjourned at 8:36.
So early.
Thank you.